Have you ever wondered what happens when a perfect life shatters in complete silence? Isabella, the pregnant wife of millionaire Richard Sterling, had everything a woman could dream of. But one day she vanished without a trace, leaving behind only an echo. While Richard's ambitious mistress, Chloe, celebrated her victory, she never imagined the man who had everything would break down and cry, not for his lost possession, but for a love he never knew he had. This is a story of how a quiet departure created the loudest roar, proving that true wealth isn't what you own, but what you can't bear to lose. The late afternoon sun, the color of expensive champagne, slanted through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air like tiny, carefree spirits. Isabella Sterling watched them from her perch on a velvet chaise lounge, one hand resting protectively on the gentle swell of her stomach. At 7 months pregnant, her body was a landscape of change, a testament to the new life she nurtured within. The baby, their son, was the one pure, untainted thing in this gilded cage. From the outside, her life was an object of profound envy. She was the wife of Richard Sterling, a man whose ambition had carved a formidable empire in the cutthroat world of corporate realty estate. Their home, a sprawling duplex overlooking Central Park, was a monument to his success, filled with art that was more investment than passion, and furniture too beautiful to be truly comfortable. Her reflection in the polished chrome of a nearby sculpture was distorted, a funhouse version of the woman she was supposed to be. Serene, fulfilled, radiant. Instead, she saw the faint, violet shadows under her eyes that no amount of concealer could hide, and a tension in her jaw that bespoke 1,000 unshed tears. The silence of the apartment was a living entity, broken only by the distant, muted symphony of New York City traffic. It was a silence that had grown over the years, seeping into the cracks of their marriage until it had become its very foundation. Richard was not a cruel man, not in the conventional sense. He didn't raise his voice or his hand. His cruelty was one of neglect, a slow, soul-crushing indifference that was far more damaging. He saw her not as a partner, but as his most beautiful acquisition, a final, polished piece to complete the portrait of his success. He adorned her with diamonds, but never with his time. He filled her closet with designer clothes, but never asked about the woman who wore them. He had provided the sperm for their child with the same detached efficiency he applied to a business transaction, a necessary step to secure his legacy. Her phone buzzed on the marble side table. A notification from a society blog. A picture of Richard captured last night at a gallery opening she had been too fatigued to attend. He was laughing, his head tilted towards a striking redhead in a green silk dress. Isabella zoomed in. Chloe Summers, an up-and-coming architect Richard's firm had recently contracted. She was sharp, hungry, and exuded the kind of predatory ambition Isabella recognized in her husband, because she'd once seen it in herself long ago. Isabella had seen the lingering glances, the late-night texts disguised as work, the scent of a different perfume on his suit jackets. She wasn't a fool. She closed her eyes, and instead of the penthouse, she was back in her small, cluttered apartment in Brooklyn, years ago. A younger Isabella, a law student with fire in her belly and a fierce belief in justice. She had dreams of working for a nonprofit, of being a voice for the voiceless. Then Richard had swept into her life, a force of nature, dazzling her with his charm and the sheer scale of his world. She had mistaken his ambition for passion, his possessiveness for love. She had allowed herself to be molded, polished, and placed on this pedestal, slowly forgetting the woman she had intended to be. The fire had dwindled to an ember, and now she feared it was almost out. But the baby changed everything. His tiny flutters against her ribs were a constant reminder of a life beyond this suffocating luxury. He deserved more than a mother who was a ghost in her own home and a father who was a stranger. He deserved authenticity, warmth, and a love that wasn't transactional, and she deserved to be the woman who could give him that. That evening, Richard came home late, smelling of scotch and Chloe's jasmine perfume. He dropped a perfunctory kiss on Isabella's forehead, his eyes already on the stock market ticker flashing on the television. "How was your day?" he asked, the question a reflex, not a genuine inquiry. "Quiet," she replied, her voice even. "I finalized the nursery." "Good. Did you order the antique rocking horse from the catalog I left you? I did, she lied. She had, in fact, canceled the obscenely expensive order and donated the equivalent amount to a children's hospital. It was a small, secret act of rebellion, but it felt like a monumental victory. He grunted in satisfaction, loosening his tie. I'm closing the Westwood deal tomorrow. It's going to be massive. We should celebrate this weekend. Maybe a trip to the Hamptons. He spoke of we, but she knew it was a royal we. She was merely the companion, the accessory. He would spend the weekend on his phone, barking orders, while she was expected to sit by the pool and look content. She watched him move around the room, a handsome, powerful stranger who shared her bed. The love she once felt had long ago curdled into a hollow ache, which had finally given way to a cold, hard clarity. Ambition, she now understood, could be a cancer. It had consumed him, and it had nearly consumed her, but no more. Later that night, as he slept beside her, a deep and dreamless sleep of the untroubled, Isabella lay awake, charting her course. Her plan had been forming for months, a secret blueprint for escape. She had been quietly siphoning money from her allowance into a new account under her maiden name, a name he had probably forgotten. She had researched towns, small and insignificant, places where Mrs. Sterling would never be sought. She had packed a single bag, hidden in the back of her cavernous closet, filled not with designer clothes but with practical things, sentimental treasures, and a copy of a worn-out law textbook she hadn't opened in years. She wasn't running away in a fit of pique. This was a rescue mission. She was rescuing her son from a life of gilded emptiness, and she was rescuing herself from oblivion. There would be no dramatic confrontation, no screaming match. That was not her style, and it would give him a fight to win. She would simply disappear. An elegant, silent vanishing act. He would wake up one morning, and a piece of his perfect life, his most prized possession, would simply be gone. Let him rage against the silence. Let the mistress believe she had won. Isabella knew the truth. She was finally setting herself and her child free. Richard Sterling woke to the insistent, programmed hum of his automated blinds retracting. Light flooded the master suite, glinting off the chrome accents and the cold glass surfaces he favored. He rolled over, his hand reaching for the warm space beside him, and found only cool, crisp Egyptian cotton. He frowned. Isabella was usually the one to wake him. A gentle hand on his shoulder, a cup of coffee already waiting on the nightstand. She clung to these small domestic rituals with a quiet tenacity he found both endearing and slightly pathetic. He sat up, swinging his legs over the side of the bed. "Isabella?" he called out, his voice raspy with sleep. The silence that answered was absolute, profound. It was different from the usual morning quiet. It felt heavy, deliberate. He walked through the suite, into the cavernous walk-in closet, her side meticulously organized, but somehow looking untouched. He checked the master bath with its twin marble vanities. Her toothbrush was missing, a small, insignificant detail, yet it sent a strange prickle of unease down his spine. He descended the floating glass staircase to the main living area. The penthouse was immaculate, as always. The cleaning staff had been yesterday, but the air was still sterile. Her favorite cashmere throw was folded neatly on the chaise lounge, not artfully draped as she usually left it. The book she was reading was closed on the side table, a silver bookmark tucked precisely at the page she had stopped on. It was as if the room had been staged. On the gleaming white marble of the kitchen island, propped against a ridiculously expensive fruit bowl, was a single sheet of heavy, cream-colored stationery. It was her personal stationery, the kind she used for thank-you notes. His name, Richard, was written on the front in her elegant, looping script. He picked it up, expecting a list of errands, a reminder about a dinner party. Instead, the note inside was brutally short. "I am gone. Please do not look for me." That was it. No explanation, no recriminations, no signature. The words were stark against the creamy paper. He read them again, and then a third time, a cold knot tightening in his stomach. This had to be a joke, a poorly conceived melodramatic prank. Isabella was not impulsive. She was predictable, placid. She was the calm water to his storm. She wouldn't just leave. Especially not now, with the baby coming. Their son, his heir. He pulled out his phone, his thumb hovering over her contact photo. A smiling, sun-drenched picture of her from a trip to Italy 2 years ago. He looked happy. He dialed. It went straight to voicemail. "Isabella, this isn't funny," he said, his voice tight. "Call me back. Now." He tried her mother's number. A pleasant but firm voicemail message informed him that Eleanor was on a 2-month cruise through the Norwegian fjords and would not be reachable. Convenient. Too convenient. Panic, an unfamiliar and unwelcome emotion, began to claw at him. He stalked through the apartment, opening closets, pulling back curtains as if she might be hiding behind them. The nursery, once a source of detached pride, now felt like a mausoleum. The tiny clothes, the handcrafted crib, the silent mobile. They were all monuments to a future that had just been erased. He saw the empty space where the antique rocking horse should have been. A flicker of memory, him telling her to order it, her quiet agreement. He hadn't even thought to check if it had arrived. His mind raced, cycling through possibilities. Had she been kidnapped? No. There was no ransom note, no sign of forced entry. Had she had a medical emergency? He called the doorman, who confirmed Mrs. Sterling had left the building at 5:30 a.m., alone, carrying a single suitcase. She had told him she was going to visit a friend in Connecticut for a few days. She had been calm, smiling even. The doorman had thought nothing of it. The cold knot in his stomach turned to ice. She had planned this. The calm smile, the lie to the doorman, the timing with her mother's trip. This was a calculated, deliberate act. But why? Their life was perfect. He gave her everything. He was building an empire for their son. What more could she possibly want? His phone buzzed. It was Chloe. "Thinking of you. Can't wait to celebrate the Westwood deal tonight." A picture of her followed, pouting playfully at the camera from her sleek, minimalist office. For a moment, he had forgotten. The deal. The celebration. Chloe. Did Isabella know about Chloe? He had been careful, discreet. But Isabella was observant in her quiet way. Perhaps she wasn't as placid as he'd thought. He felt a surge of anger, hot and sharp. How dare she? How dare she throw this back in his face? Embarrass him? Disrupt his life when he was on the cusp of his greatest professional triumph? He typed a reply to Chloe. "Change of plans. Something's come up with Isabella. Family matter." He needed to control the narrative. An unstable, emotional, pregnant wife who needed some space. That was manageable. A wife who had abandoned him. That was a PR disaster. Chloe called him instantly. "Is everything okay, darling? Is it the baby?" Her voice was a perfect symphony of concern, but Richard could hear the underlying note of excitement. "She's fine. She just went to visit a friend for a few days. Feeling overwhelmed," he lied, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "We'll have to postpone our celebration." "Oh, of course," Chloe said, her tone dripping with sympathy. "Poor thing. Pregnancy can be so trying. Well, if she's gone for a few days, maybe I can come over and cheer you up tonight? Just for a little while?" The offer was brazen, but it was exactly what he expected from her. It was part of what drew him to her unapologetic ambition, her directness. She saw an opening and she took it. Right now, he didn't have the energy to deal with her. "Not tonight, Chloe. I need to handle this." "All right, darling. Call me if you need anything. Anything at all." He hung up and stared at Isabella's note again. "Please do not look for me." It wasn't a request. It was a challenge. A gauntlet thrown down, and Richard Sterling never ever backed down from a challenge. He wouldn't allow her to just disappear, to take his son and vanish from his life. She was his wife. She was carrying his child. She belonged to him. The shock was now hardening into a cold, diamond-hard resolve. He would find her. He would bring her back. And then there would be a reckoning. He just had to figure out where in the world she could have possibly gone. One day bled into the next, then into a full, agonizing week. The initial shock and anger that had propelled Richard through the first 48 hours began to curdle into a gnawing, unfamiliar anxiety. The sprawling penthouse, once a symbol of his dominion, now felt like an echo chamber. every silent corner mocking him with Isabella's absence. He found himself wandering into the nursery, tracing the outline of the unslept-in crib, the scent of lavender and baby powder she'd chosen hanging in the air like a ghost. He had started by doing the obvious things. He called her friends, the polished society wives he found vapid and boring. They were all surprised, offering rehearsed sympathies. No, they hadn't heard from Isabella. Yes, they had noticed she'd been withdrawn lately. They had chalked it up to pregnancy hormones. Their words were useless, their concern a thinly veiled appetite for gossip. He checked their joint bank accounts. Untouched. He reviewed the credit card statements. Her last purchase was a week ago at a bookstore in the West Village. He went there himself, a man in a $1,000 suit looking wildly out of place amongst the dusty shelves. The cashier, a young woman with purple hair, vaguely remembered her. Yeah, the sad, pretty lady. She bought a bunch of travel guides, Oregon, Washington, Northern California, and some books on constitutional law. The detail was so bizarre, so out of character, that Richard dismissed it as a mistake. By day 3, his pride was sufficiently shredded to do what he should have done from the start. He hired the best private investigator money could buy. Mr. Harrison was a former detective, a man with a bloodhound's reputation and the weary, cynical eyes to match. He sat opposite Richard in the sterile living room, his worn tweed jacket a stark contrast to the minimalist decor. She left her phone on the kitchen counter, disconnected from the network. Her laptop is in her office, wiped clean, Richard explained. The words clipped. She took one suitcase and her passport. She withdrew $5,000 in cash, the daily maximum, every day for the past 2 weeks from her personal account. An account I didn't know she had. The admission felt like swallowing glass. Harrison nodded slowly, making notes in a small leather-bound book. Smart, he murmured, almost to himself. No digital footprint. Cash. A clean break. Your wife, Mr. Sterling, is either very frightened or very clever. She's my wife, Richard snapped. She's pregnant with my child. Find her. The days that followed were a masterclass in frustration. Harrison's updates were grimly concise. Isabella had not used a credit card, booked a flight, or rented a car under her own name. She hadn't crossed any borders. She had simply stepped out of a yellow cab near Penn Station and dissolved into the city's teeming anonymity. She had become a ghost. Meanwhile, Chloe's patience was wearing thin. She had initially played the part of the supportive, understanding lover, but her ambitions didn't allow for long-term deferment. She saw Isabella's disappearance as the final obstacle being removed, and Richard's continued obsession with finding her was infuriating. It's been over a week, Richard, she said one evening, running a manicured hand down his tense back as he stared out the window at the city lights. She had let herself into the penthouse, a territorial move he didn't have the energy to contest. Don't you think it's time to consider that she doesn't want to be found? Maybe she ran off with someone. Don't be ridiculous, he scoffed, but the seed of doubt, poisonous and unwelcome, took root. Was it possible? Had her quietness been a cover for a secret life he knew nothing about? Is it ridiculous? Chloe pressed, her voice silky smooth. She was unhappy. You said so yourself. She's a beautiful woman. Well, maybe she found someone who could give her what you couldn't. I gave her everything, Richard bit back, turning to face her. Did you? Chloe's eyes were sharp, intelligent. You gave her things, Richard. A beautiful cage. Maybe she wanted to be seen, not just displayed. Her words hit too close to a truth he was unwilling to confront. He hated that she could read him so well. He pushed the thought away, focusing his anger back on Isabella. The betrayal felt sharper, more personal than any affair. An affair was a simple, carnal transgression. This was a repudiation of his entire life, his entire world. His work began to suffer. He was distracted during meetings, snapping at subordinates, his mind constantly drifting to the puzzle of his wife. Where was she? Was she safe? The baby. Was his son okay? The question echoed in the dead of night, a terrifying whisper. He had always viewed the child as a concept, a legacy. Now, for the first time, he felt a flicker of something else, a primal, protective fear. Harrison called at the end of the second week. We found the cab driver, he said, his voice flat. He dropped her at a small regional bus station in Newark. She paid cash. She was wearing a simple dress, no jewelry, and a pair of sunglasses. He said she bought a ticket on a bus heading west. The route has 100 stops between here and Chicago. She could have gotten off anywhere. The news was a gut punch. A bus. Isabella, who was used to private jets and chauffeured cars, had taken a bus. It was another piece of the puzzle that didn't fit the image of the woman he thought he'd married. The scale of her planning, her quiet determination, was staggering. She hadn't just left him. She had shed her entire identity. That night, Chloe tried again. She cooked him dinner, filling the silent apartment with the aroma of roasted garlic and herbs. She wore a black dress that clung to her like a second skin and spoke in low, soothing tones about a new project, a new deal, a future they could build together. She was painting a picture of a life with her, a life where he was the undisputed center, a life unburdened by a sad, complicated wife. "Let her go, Richard," she whispered, her lips close to his ear. She made her choice. Now you can make yours. We can be happy. He looked at her beautiful, hungry face, and felt nothing. Her ambition, once a thrilling reflection of his own, now seemed grasping and hollow. Her attempts to comfort him felt like a corporate takeover strategy. The victory she so clearly felt was a victory over a woman she didn't know, for a prize she didn't understand. His mind wasn't on the future she was selling. It was on a bus heading west into the vast, unknown heart of America, carrying a woman who was a stranger to him and his unborn son. The vanishing act was complete. She had not only escaped, she had erased herself, and in doing so, had left an Isabella-shaped hole in his universe that was beginning to pull him into its void. The investigation dragged on, each day yielding smaller and smaller fragments of information, like puzzle pieces from 1,000 different boxes. Mr. Harrison, methodical and relentless, started digging not into Isabella's present, but into her past, trying to find the ghost of the woman she was before she became Mrs. Sterling. What he found chipped away at the marble statue Richard had constructed in his mind. He discovered her old Brooklyn apartment, which she had never sold, only sublet through a discreet agency. The tenant, a grad student, was moving out, and Harrison gained access. The apartment was small, a little worn, but it had a warmth that the penthouse lacked. The walls were lined with books, not just law texts, but poetry, classic novels, and political histories. Tucked away in a closet was a box of old case files from her time at a legal aid clinic during law school. Richard stared at the photos Harrison sent him, files on tenants' rights, wrongful evictions, domestic disputes. She had fought for people, passionately and for free. It was a side of her he couldn't reconcile with the woman who spent her afternoons at charity luncheons. Then Harrison uncovered the bank account, the one she'd been using to save her escape fund. It was opened 8 years ago, before she'd even met him. The initial deposits were small, scraped together from a part-time waitressing job. Over the years after they were married, the deposits became larger, more regular, a portion of her generous allowance meticulously siphoned off. This wasn't a recent plan. This was a long game, a strategy of quiet independence she had maintained throughout their entire marriage. The realization was unsettling. He had been living with a stranger, a woman with a secret life, a hidden core of self-sufficiency he had never suspected. These revelations left Richard feeling unmoored, adrift in a sea of confusion. He would sit in his silent office high above Manhattan and stare at the grainy photo of her on the bus station's security camera. A woman in a simple dress, her face obscured by sunglasses. She looked anonymous, determined. He tried to superimpose the image of his wife, elegant, serene, decorated, onto this fugitive figure, and the two refused to merge. Chloe, ever the opportunist, saw his confusion as fertile ground for her own narrative. She recognized that Isabella's ghost was a more formidable rival than the living woman had ever been. She needed to tarnish the memory, to repaint the portrait of the victimized wife into that of a conniving, selfish runaway. She began to plant seeds, subtle at first, then with growing confidence. "It's the money, isn't it?" she mused one evening, swirling a glass of wine as she lounged on his sofa. She saved all that cash, had a secret apartment. She was never really with you, Richard. She was just waiting for her moment. A woman like that, From a simple background, your world must have been a means to an end. He wanted to reject it, but Harrison's discoveries gave her words a veneer of plausibility. And the baby, Chloe continued, her voice soft with false sympathy. It's the perfect leverage. She knows you want an heir. She takes the baby, and when she finally resurfaces, she'll be able to demand anything she wants in the divorce. It's a classic gold digger move, just executed more cleverly than most. She was smart, twisting the facts to fit her story. Isabella's quiet strength became cunning. Her desire for freedom became a financial scheme. Chloe was reframing the narrative in a language Richard understood. Strategy, leverage, assets. He found himself listening, allowing the poison of her perspective to seep in, because it was easier than confronting the more painful truth, that he had failed so profoundly as a husband that his wife had chosen a bus ticket to nowhere over a life with him. The whispers became a campaign. When one of Richard's board members, a friend named Robert, mentioned how sorry he was to hear about Isabella's episode, Richard realized Chloe had been talking. She was carefully managing the story, leaking a curated version to their social circle. The narrative was consistent. Isabella, fragile and unstable due to her pregnancy, had suffered a breakdown. It was tragic, but Richard was being stoic, protective. It painted him as the victim, the long-suffering husband, and neatly erased any questions about his own conduct, about his very public association with Chloe herself. "I just want to protect you, darling," she'd say, her eyes wide with feigned sincerity. "People are starting to talk, and I can't bear to see them blame you for her instability." The lie was seductive. It absolved him. It allowed him to channel his confusion and grief into a more manageable emotion. Righteous anger. He started to believe it. Isabella the schemer. Isabella the gold digger. Isabella the unstable woman who had stolen his son. One afternoon, Harrison delivered his latest report. "We traced a purchase made with a prepaid debit card, bought with cash in a small town in Ohio, a used laptop. The shipping address was a P.O. box in rural Missouri. By the time my man got there, the box had been closed for a week." "So we're still 2 weeks behind her," Richard said, the frustration a metallic taste in his mouth. "At least. But we found something else." The P.O. box was opened under the name Anna Lawler. Lawler was her mother's maiden name. Anna Lawler. A new name for a new life. She was systematically erasing Isabella Sterling. The coldness of it, the sheer audacity, fueled the narrative Chloe had so carefully constructed. He thanked Harrison and hung up, his jaw tight. He looked around the vast, empty penthouse. All the objects, the art, the furniture, they seemed like props on a stage for a play whose leading lady had walked out. He had bought all of this to impress the world and to possess her. He saw that now. He had treated her like this apartment, something to be acquired, curated, and shown off. He had never once wondered what lay behind her sad, beautiful eyes. And Chloe, in her own way, was doing the same to him. She wasn't trying to build a life with him. She was trying to acquire his. The realization was fleeting, quickly buried under the easier, more palatable anger. Chloe was here. Isabella was gone. He chose the lie because the truth was a mirror he couldn't bear to look into. The cracks in Richard Sterling's meticulously constructed world began to show. The search for Isabella had become a consuming obsession, a background process that drained his focus and energy. At work, he was a ghost haunting the corner office, his mind perpetually elsewhere. Deals he would have once pursued with predatory zeal now felt meaningless. His empire, the monument to his ambition, seemed like a hollow shell. He started seeing her everywhere. A pregnant woman crossing the street would make his heart seize, only to be followed by a wave of disappointment. The scent of rain on hot pavement would transport him back to their first date, a memory he hadn't accessed in years. He was unraveling, thread by thread, and he didn't know how to stop it. The breaking point came during the quarterly board meeting for Sterling Enterprises. It was the culmination of the Westwood deal, his crowning achievement. He was supposed to be triumphant, powerful, in control. But as he stood at the head of the polished mahogany table, the faces of his board members blurred. The numbers on the projector screen swam before his eyes. All he could see was the empty space where Isabella should have been, cheering him on from the sidelines as she always did, her quiet pride a steadying force he had always taken for granted. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words wouldn't come. His carefully prepared speech about profit margins and future growth felt like a foreign language. He gripped the edge of the table, a sudden wave of dizziness washing over him. "Richard, are you all right?" It was Robert, his face etched with concern. Richard looked at the faces staring back at him, men he had known for years, men who respected and feared him, and he felt nothing but a profound, crushing emptiness. The empire meant nothing. The deal meant nothing. He had conquered the world, but he had lost his wife and his son, and he didn't even know why. A single hot tear traced a path down his cheek, then another. He stood there in front of his board of directors, the titans of industry, and began to cry. Not silent, dignified tears, but ragged, soul-wrenching sobs that shook his entire body. It was the sound of a man breaking apart. The room fell into a stunned, horrified silence. Robert quickly stood up, adjourning the meeting and ushering the bewildered board members out, leaving Richard alone in his glass-walled cage, completely undone. Chloe found him there hours later, sitting in the dark, the city lights glittering mockingly outside. The story of his breakdown had already ripped through their social circle. She had come to perform damage control, to salvage her investment. "Richard, darling," she said, her voice a low, soothing croon. She knelt before him, placing a hand on his knee. "It's okay. You're under an immense amount of stress. Anyone would break." He looked at her, his eyes red-rimmed and hollow. He saw the calculation in her gaze, the ambition that was always churning just beneath the surface. He saw the carefully applied mask of sympathy, and for the first time, her touch felt alien, repellent. "She did this to you," Chloe whispered, seizing the opportunity to drive the wedge deeper. "This is what she wanted, to destroy you." But her words had lost their power. The lie, which had been such a comfortable shield, now felt flimsy and false. He knew with a certainty that cut through his grief that Isabella had never wanted to destroy him. She had only wanted to save herself. The cruelty was his. The neglect was his. The failure was his. "No," he said, his voice raspy. He pushed her hand away. It was a small gesture, but it felt seismic. "It wasn't her. It was me." Chloe recoiled slightly, her mask slipping for a fraction of a second. Surprise, then irritation flashed in her eyes. This was not part of the plan. He was supposed to be angry at Isabella, not himself. He was supposed to turn to her for comfort, cementing her place at his side. "Don't be ridiculous, Richard," she snapped, her voice losing its sympathetic softness. "You can't blame yourself for her manipulation." "Was it manipulation?" he asked, the question directed more at himself than at her. "Or was it desperation? Did I ever, even once, ask her what she wanted? Did I ever look at her, really look at her, and see the person instead of the prize?" The truth of it, the shame of it, washed over him. He remembered the law books Harrison had found. He remembered her passion, the fire in her eyes when they first met, a fire he had systematically extinguished with his casual indifference. He had taken a vibrant, brilliant woman and tried to turn her into a beautiful object, and he had been succeeding. Her disappearing act wasn't an attack. It was an act of survival. He was crying again, but these tears were different. They weren't for the loss of his possession or the blow to his pride. They were tears of pure, unadulterated grief. Grief for the woman he had never known. Grief for the love he had thrown away. Grief for the child who would be born in some anonymous town, who would never know his father. A father who was only now in his absence, beginning to understand what it meant to love him. Chloe stood up, her face a mask of cold fury. She was an architect of power, and she recognized a failing structure when she saw one. The man sobbing before her was not the ruthless titan she had set out to conquer. He was just a broken man. "Pull yourself together, Richard," she said, her voice like ice. "This is pathetic." He didn't even look up. He didn't have the strength. He just sat there, in the ruins of his perfect life, mourning a loss he was only just beginning to comprehend. The mistress, the victor, stood over him, but her prize had turned to dust in her hands. She had never imagined the great Richard Sterling would cry. She had been right. He wasn't crying for her, or even for himself. He was crying for Isabella. And in that moment, Chloe knew with a chilling certainty that she had lost. 2,000 miles away, where the mist-shrouded pines of Oregon meet the raw, churning power of the Pacific Ocean, Isabella Sterling was gone. In her place was Anna Lawler. The name felt strange and freeing on her tongue, a clean slate. She had found her way to the small coastal town of Astoria, a place of hardy fishing boats, charmingly worn Victorian houses, and a quiet anonymity that felt like a balm to her bruised soul. Her new home was a small, second-floor apartment above a quiet bookstore, with windows that overlooked the Columbia River as it spilled into the sea. It was a world away from the silent, opulent penthouse. Here the silence was different. It was filled with the cry of gulls, the distant clang of a ship's bell, and the soothing whisper of turning pages from the shop below. The air smelled of salt and rain and old paper, a scent she found more intoxicating than any designer perfume. The first few weeks had been a blur of fear and adrenaline. Every siren made her jump. Every stranger's glance felt like scrutiny. But as the days turned into weeks, the fear began to recede, replaced by a tentative, blossoming peace. She had furnished her apartment with secondhand finds, each piece chosen for comfort and character, not for its statement. A lumpy, comfortable armchair, a sturdy wooden table scarred with the history of other people's lives. A quilt made by a local artisan. For the first time in a decade, she was surrounded by things that felt like her. She had secured a part-time job working in the bookstore downstairs. It was owned by Margaret, a woman in her late 60s with a cloud of white hair, hands stained with ink, and eyes that held a deep, knowing kindness. Margaret hadn't asked for references or questioned the history of the quiet, heavily pregnant woman who had walked into her shop one day. She had simply seen something in Anna's eyes, a love for books, a need for sanctuary, and had offered her the job on the spot. The pay is terrible, the hours are long, and the customers will ask you the most ridiculous questions, Margaret had said with a wry smile. But the company is good. She had gestured to the towering shelves of books. They never let you down. Anna's days fell into a gentle, predictable rhythm. She would wake early, watch the fishing boats head out in the dawn light, her hands cradling her belly as her son kicked and turned within her. She would work in the shop, recommending novels, dusting shelves, the scent of old paper and binding glue becoming her new reality. She spoke with the locals, fishermen, artists, retirees, people whose lives were grounded in the tides and the seasons, not the stock market. They were curious but respectful, accepting her as the quiet new woman in town. No one asked about a husband or a diamond ring. They just asked how she was feeling and if she needed help carrying her groceries up the stairs. She was rediscovering the woman she had been before Richard, the woman who found joy in a perfectly crafted sentence, who could spend hours debating legal theory, who believed in a world beyond material wealth. She began reading her old law books again, not with any grand plan, but simply to reconnect with the part of herself she had suppressed for so long. The fire she thought had been extinguished was slowly, tentatively, being rekindled. One rainy afternoon, as she was shelving a new shipment of books, Margaret brought her a cup of chamomile tea. "You seem happier these past few days, dear," Margaret observed, her gaze gentle. "The color is coming back to your cheeks." Anna smiled, a genuine, unforced smile that reached her eyes. "I feel lighter," she admitted. "I feel like I can finally breathe." "Sometimes you have to travel a long way to find a place where the air fits your lungs," Margaret said sagely. She paused, then added, "This is a good place to raise a child. People look out for each other here." The simple statement, offered without an ounce of pity or curiosity, brought tears to Anna's eyes. It was the validation she didn't know she needed. She wasn't a runaway wife or a tragic figure. She was a woman building a new life, a mother preparing a safe harbor for her child. She often thought of Richard, but the memories were becoming less painful, more distant. She didn't hate him. In her newfound clarity, she mostly felt a profound pity for him. He was trapped in a cage of his own making, a prisoner of the ambition that drove him. She hoped, for his sake, that he would one day find a way out. But his journey was no longer her own. Her focus was on the future, on the imminent arrival of her son. She had bought a simple wooden crib from a local carpenter and painted it a soft, sunny yellow. She knitted a small blue blanket, her stitches uneven but filled with love. She attended a local prenatal group, sharing her hopes and fears with other expectant mothers, their backgrounds a tapestry of different lives, all united by the universal experience of creation. Lying in bed one night, listening to the rain patter against the window pane, she felt her son give a particularly strong kick. She placed her hand on her stomach and whispered, "It's just you and me, little one. We're going to be okay." And for the first time, she believed it with every fiber of her being. She had traded a gilded cage for a small room with a view of the sea, and in doing so, had found a wealth Richard Sterling could never comprehend. She had found herself, and she was finally, truly home. Back in New York, the fallout from Richard's boardroom breakdown was swift and brutal. The whispers that Chloe had so carefully cultivated about Isabella's instability were now redirected towards him. The story shifted. Richard Sterling, the Titan, was crumbling under pressure. His judgment was compromised. The carefully constructed facade of impenetrable strength had been shattered, and the sharks in the water were beginning to circle. Chloe, watching her future prospects dim with every rumor, shifted her strategy from seduction to damage control, and finally to desperation. Her plan had been to seamlessly slide into the role of the new Mrs. Sterling, the woman who had saved Richard from his tragic marriage. But the man she was dealing with now was not the confident predator she'd been drawn to. He was listless, haunted, and, worst of all, uninterested in her. She decided a direct confrontation was her only remaining move. She cornered him in the penthouse one evening, dressed not in a seductive cocktail dress, but in a severe, elegant power suit, as if preparing for a hostile negotiation. "We need to talk, Richard," she began, her tone clipped and devoid of its usual warmth. He was standing by the window, nursing a glass of scotch, a nightly ritual that had become his only comfort. He didn't turn to look at her. "I'm tired, Chloe." "I'm sure you are," she retorted, her voice sharp. "But your little performance at the office has created a massive problem. For both of us. Robert is calling for an emergency meeting to discuss your leadership." "Your leadership, Richard? Do you have any idea how much work I've put into this? Into us?" The raw, undisguised avarice in her voice finally broke through his melancholic haze. He turned slowly, looking at her as if seeing her for the first time. He saw the hard ambition in her eyes, the ruthless calculation. And in that moment, he saw a perfect, horrifying reflection of himself. She wasn't his partner. She was his protégé, his mirror image. She wanted the power, the prestige, the name. She didn't want him, the broken man standing before her. She wanted Richard Sterling, TM, the brand. "This was never about us, was it?" he said, his voice quiet, heavy with a weary sort of revelation. "It was about you." Chloe let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Oh, don't you dare try to take the moral high ground with me. You and I are the same, Richard. We see what we want, and we take it. I wanted you, your world, and I was on the verge of getting it. Don't you think I've earned it? I stood by you. I listened to you moan about your sad, perfect wife. I was here when she abandoned you." "She didn't abandon me," he said, the words tasting of truth. "She escaped." The admission hung in the air between them, stark and undeniable. It was the one truth Chloe could not accept, because it invalidated her entire narrative, her entire victory. "She ran away like a coward," Chloe spat, her composure finally cracking. "She left you and she took your son." "Did she?" Richard countered, taking a step closer, his eyes clear for the first time in months. "Or did I drive her away? Did I create a home so cold, a life so empty, that running into the unknown with nothing was a better option? Did I ever love her, Chloe? Or did I just own her?" He wasn't really asking her. He was putting voice to the questions that had been tormenting him in the dead of night. He saw it all with sickening clarity now. Isabella's quiet sadness, her forced smiles, her retreat into a world of her own. They weren't signs of weakness. They were symptoms of his own failure. Chloe stared at him, her face a mask of disbelief and rage. This was her endgame, and he was rewriting the rules. "I don't have time for your existential crisis, Richard," she said, her voice dropping to a low, threatening hiss. "You need to get a handle on this situation, issue a statement, blame Isabella, tell the world she's mentally unstable, and you're the victim. Reclaim your power, or you will lose everything, and I will not go down with you." It was an ultimatum, a final, desperate gambit. She was trying to appeal to the old Richard, the man who valued power and control above all else. But that man was a ghost. He looked at her, at this beautiful, brilliant, ruthless woman, and he felt a profound sense of pity. She was still trapped in the game he was finally beginning to see a way out of. "It's over, Chloe," he said, his voice flat, final. "What did you say?" "Our arrangement. It's over. I want you to pack your things and leave. From the firm, from this building, from my life." Chloe's face went pale, then flushed with a furious red. "You can't be serious. After everything, you're choosing her? A woman who isn't even here?" "I'm not choosing her," he said softly. "I'm choosing something else, something better. I'm choosing to stop being the man who deserved to be left. You should go." He turned his back on her, a gesture of dismissal more potent than any shout, and looked back out at the city. He heard her gasp, a strangled sound of pure fury. There was a moment of charged silence, and then the sound of her heels clicking angrily across the marble floor, the slam of the door echoing through the vast, empty apartment. He was alone, truly alone. The mistress was gone. The wife was gone. But for the first time since Isabella had vanished, he didn't feel a sense of loss. He felt a strange, terrifying, and exhilarating sense of freedom. He had finally hit rock bottom, and the only way left to go was up. A month after the confrontation with Chloe, Mr. Harrison requested a final meeting. He sat in the same chair he had occupied on his first visit, his expression unreadable, his worn tweed jacket a familiar sight in the now oppressive opulence of the penthouse. "The trail is cold, Mr. Sterling," he said, getting straight to the point. There was no preamble, no softening of the blow. "Stone cold. We've exhausted every lead. The prepaid cards, the P.O. boxes, the false names. She was always 2 steps ahead. She's a ghost. My professional opinion," he paused, meeting Richard's gaze, "is that your wife does not want to be found, and the woman I've been tracking is resourceful enough to make that a reality. You could spend the rest of your fortune and the rest of your life looking, and you might never find her." He slid a final invoice across the table. "I'd advise you to stop, for your own sake. Let her go." The old Richard would have raged, would have thrown more money at the problem, refusing to accept defeat. But the man sitting opposite Harrison simply nodded, a strange sense of calm washing over him. The investigator's words weren't a defeat. They were a form of permission. Permission to stop fighting a war he had already lost, a war he had started. "Thank you, Harrison," he said, his voice even, "for everything." Harrison looked surprised by the quiet resignation. He stood up, shook Richard's hand, and left. The click of the door closing behind him was a sound of finality. The search was over. Isabella was truly gone. Instead of the crushing despair he had anticipated, Richard felt a quiet sense of peace. The frantic energy that had consumed him for months dissipated, leaving a vast, quiet space in its wake. The obsession had been a shield, a way to avoid looking at the wreckage of his own life. Now there was nothing left to do but survey the damage. He started small. He sold the penthouse. The gilded cage held too many ghosts, too many reminders of his failures. He moved into a smaller, more understated apartment downtown, a place with warm wood floors and walls he filled not with investment art, but with photographs of his parents, of his sister, of a childhood he had long since left behind. He began the slow, painful work of mending the relationships his ambition had corroded. He called his younger sister Sarah, whom he hadn't spoken to in over a year, after a fight about his missing her son's birthday. He apologized, without excuses or justifications. The silence on the other end of the line was long, and then her voice, thick with emotion, said, "I've missed you, Rich." It was a start. He stepped back from the day-to-day operations of his company, promoting a capable executive to take his place. He found that the relentless pursuit of the next deal, the next conquest, he no longer held any appeal. The board, having witnessed his breakdown and subsequent withdrawal, was relieved. He was still the owner, but he was no longer the king. He started walking through the city, not with a destination in mind, but just to see it, to feel its rhythm. He noticed the street musicians, the laughter of children in the parks, the small, everyday human dramas he had been blind to from the tinted windows of his chauffeured car. One Saturday on a whim, he walked into a soup kitchen, a place he would have previously only engaged with by writing a large, tax-deductible check. He was awkward at first, a man in a cashmere sweater completely out of his element. But he was put to work chopping vegetables, his hands more accustomed to signing contracts, growing calloused and raw. He listened to the stories of the people he served, stories of hardship, loss, and incredible resilience. He felt a sense of connection, of shared humanity, that his wealth had always insulated him from. He began volunteering there every weekend. He was changing. The grief for Isabella and his son had not disappeared, but it had transformed. It was no longer a frantic, angry obsession, but a quiet, persistent ache in his heart, a reminder of the man he had been and the man he was trying to become. He wasn't doing these things to find her or to earn her forgiveness. He was doing them for himself. He was trying to build a life that the woman she had become might not have needed to escape from. He thought about the child, his son. The boy would be almost 2 years old now. Richard would picture him in his mind, a small boy with Isabella's serious eyes and, perhaps, his own stubborn chin. He wondered if the boy was happy, if he was loved. He knew with a certainty that brought both pain and comfort that with Isabella as his mother, the answer was yes. He had missed the birth, the first steps, the first words. He had lost the right to be a father, but he could still become a good man. Maybe in the end, that was a kind of redemption. His heart, once closed and armored, was slowly, painfully, opening up to a world he had never truly seen. 3 years passed. The new Richard Sterling was a quieter, more thoughtful man. His business still thrived, but at a distance managed by others. His life was simpler, his wealth a tool for quiet philanthropy rather than a weapon of ego. The ache in his heart for his lost son and the wife he never knew remained. But it had settled into a part of his landscape, a sad and beautiful feature that reminded him of how far he had come. He was in Portland for a conference on sustainable urban development, a passion project he'd become deeply involved in. The conference ended a day early, and he found himself with a rare, unstructured 24 hours. On an impulse he couldn't explain, he rented a car and started driving west, towards the coast. He didn't have a destination in mind, just a pull towards the sea, towards the wild gray expanse of the Pacific. He drove through forests of towering pines, the air growing cooler, tinged with the scent of salt and damp earth. He ended up in Astoria, the charming historic town clinging to the hillside where the river met the ocean. He felt a sense of peace there, a feeling of being at the edge of the world. He walked along the waterfront, watching the sea lions bark on the docks, and felt a strange sense of belonging, of quietude. He wandered into the town's main street, lined with antique shops and small cafes. A bookstore, with a quaint, hand-painted sign that read Margaret's Books, caught his eye. He stepped inside, the chime of a small bell announcing his arrival. The interior was warm and cluttered, smelling wonderfully of old paper and wood smoke from a small stove in the corner. He browsed the shelves, his fingers tracing the spines of well-loved novels. And then he heard it. A woman's voice, soft and clear, reading from a children's book. "The moon is high, the stars are bright. Sleep now, little one, and dream of the light." The voice was achingly familiar. His heart began to pound, a frantic, thunderous rhythm against his ribs. He moved slowly, cautiously, towards the children's section at the back of the store. And there she was. She was sitting in a small rocking chair, a little boy with a mop of dark, curly hair nestled in her lap. It was Isabella, but it was also not Isabella. Her hair was shorter, her face was free of makeup, etched with fine lines around her eyes that spoke of laughter and worry. She wore a simple sweater and jeans. She looked real, grounded. The fragile porcelain beauty of Isabella Sterling had been replaced by the vibrant, warm presence of this woman, Anna. The little boy in her lap looked up, and Richard's breath caught in his throat. The boy had his chin, his dark hair, but his eyes were all hers, wide, serious, and intelligent. This was his son. She finished the book and closed it, kissing the top of the boy's head. She looked up then, and her eyes met Richard's across the crowded shelves. For a long moment, the world stopped. There was no shock on her face, no fear, just a flicker of recognition, followed by a deep, calm sadness. And then, something that looked like acceptance. He didn't know what to do, what to say. The script he had rehearsed in his mind 1,000 times, of anger, of pleading, of demanding, vanished. That script was for a different man, for a different woman. She stood up, gently taking the boy's hand. "Leo, this is an old friend of Mommy's," she said, her voice steady. Richard knelt, so he was at eye level with the child. "Hello, Leo," he said, his voice thick with unshed tears. "It's very nice to meet you." Leo stared at him with his mother's solemn eyes, then gave a shy smile. Anna, spoke then, her voice quiet. "What are you doing here, Richard?" It wasn't an accusation. It was a simple question. "I don't know," he answered honestly. "I think maybe I was looking for a place to be quiet. I didn't know I was looking for you." They stood in the silence of the bookstore, the air thick with unspoken years, with pain and growth and change. An older woman with kind eyes, Margaret, watched them from the front counter but said nothing. "He's beautiful," Richard whispered, his gaze fixed on Leo. "He is," she agreed softly. "He's happy. He's safe." It was both a statement and a reassurance that she had made the right choice. He finally looked back at her, at this woman who was both a stranger and the most important person in his world. And he knew this wasn't a moment for grand gestures or dramatic reunions. It wasn't about reclaiming what he had lost. That life, that marriage was over. They were two entirely different people now, shaped by the separate paths they had walked. "I'm sorry, Isabella," he said, and the name felt foreign now. "For everything, for the man I was, for not seeing you. I am so, so sorry." A single tear traced a path down her cheek, but she was not sad. It was a tear of release. "I know, Richard," she said. "I forgave you a long time ago." The ending wasn't what he had ever imagined. There would be no triumphant return, no reconciliation. But as he stood in that quiet bookstore, looking at the woman his wife had become and the son he was meeting for the first time, he felt a profound sense of hope. This wasn't an ending. It was a new, unforeseen connection. A chance, perhaps, not to rebuild what was broken, but to build something new, something honest, from the ground up. It was a quiet, unexpected, and deeply inspiring beginning. The story of Richard and Isabella shows us that true growth often begins only when we have the courage to let go of the life we planned. Their journey wasn't about finding their way back to each other, but about finding their way back to themselves. It's a powerful reminder that resilience, connection, and authenticity are the real treasures in life. If their story of transformation and second chances touched your heart, please give this video a like to help it reach others. Share it with someone who might need this message, and don't forget to subscribe for more real-life romantic fiction that explores the depths of the human heart. Thank you for watching.